I never planned to become the kind of man who maps other people's lives like a highway and looks for exits to close, detours to flood, bridges to burn. But a quiet person doesn't stay quiet forever when the noise is designed to break him. I moved into my house expecting cedar and rain and the kind of silence you can drink like water. Instead, I got neighbors who learned my habits faster than I learned their last names. They were a married couple with matching smiles that looked like warning signs. In the beginning, I told myself they were only particular, that some people decorate their lives with rules when they run out of anything warm to put in them. I told myself the way Mrs. Carver watched me the first evening as if I'd arrived late to her party and tracked mud over a white rug was just curiosity. I told myself Mr. Carver's folded arms on the property line were just arms, not barricades. The first lie I stopped telling myself was that they would leave me alone. My name is Aaron. I am not built for spectacle. I was 35 years out of graduate school, a back-end developer who still preferred paper books and heavy mugs, the sort of man people forget at parties unless they need a charger. I bought the house because the porch had a tilt that felt like a personality and the backyard bled into a narrow stand of trees. I stood there the first day with my palms open and felt the breath go out of me, like a long apology I could finally stop making. Then the Carvers walked up the path without being invited and christened my home with the first of 1,000 little cuts. "We like things calm," Mrs. Carver said. Her hair was a pale, effortful color that never appeared in nature, and she glanced over my shoulder into my living room like a searchlight. "We set a standard on this street. People respect it. Everyone parks on their own side," Mr. Carver said, pointing at the concrete as if it were a constitution and I was failing a civics test. "No guests after 10. Dogs on leashes at all times. We have a neighborhood text thread. We add people when we're comfortable." I had nothing to say to that would make any difference, so I said the wrong thing. "Nice to meet you." They didn't answer. They pivoted in step and drifted back down the walkway like actors exiting stage left, already whispering. I learned fast that their standard was a wind that only blew one way. They cut hedges at sunrise and reported me for trimming mine at 7:30. They put their trash out the night before and took photos of mine an hour after pickup. If a package sat on my porch through dinner, I would find a sticky note with "We aren't a dumping ground" in all caps, and the handwriting would be careful enough to feel like a threat. On week 3, I found my mailbox door bent down like a torn lip. On week 4, the lens of the small camera I had mounted by the doorbell was sprayed with a film that wouldn't wipe clean. On week 5, someone poured something that smelled like old pennies along the base of my fence, and the boards went from honey to almost black in a finger's width. A person chooses how to interpret a pattern. I chose denial for a while because the alternative felt like letting them colonize my head. I bought new fence boards and told myself wood ages. I called the doorbell company and told myself condensation happens. I picked up a dozen eggshells on my front steps one morning and told myself kids don't mean anything by anything. I waved when I passed the Carvers on the sidewalk. They did not wave back. They looked at me the way you look at a car parked too close to your bumper. The first time I knocked on their door, it was because of noise, and that's how you end up explaining yourself to bullies. On their territory, in their light. It was after midnight and their son older. Scab on his chin. Smell of beer wafting out when the door cracked opened it and waited to be amused. Mr. Carver came up behind him in a shirt that tried to make his stomach invisible. "Problem?" he asked, like it would taste sweet to say no problem to him and go away. "The music," I said. "It's late." "We're celebrating," he said. "You new here don't understand the rhythms of this block. If you can't sleep, that's a you problem. Put on a fan. People with real jobs can sleep anywhere." I said something weak about the city noise ordinance. He smiled until I got the point. The next morning, the HOA, yes, we have one, and yes, I signed those papers with the speed of a man desperate for keys without reading the clauses like a lawyer emailed a friendly reminder about trash placement and lawn length and porch lights on after 11. There was a photo of my porch light, taken with a steady hand from their driveway across a line of night air I had mistakenly thought was mine. I measured the grass. I turned off the light before sunset. I stopped hosting my sister for dinner on weeknights because the Carver's daughter had started riding her scooter in circles around my car whenever she visited, and my sister said she didn't like the way the girl smiled, like she was waiting for something to break. I almost moved. I want to admit that because people think revenge means certainty. I scrolled listings of apartments 2 neighborhoods away that looked like the inside of your voice after an argument, white, quiet, without a porch that mattered. I imagined packing boxes. I walked into my bedroom at night and pictured myself walking out for the last time. The thing that stopped me was not pride or money. It was the little stand of trees behind the yard. One evening a pair of barred owls called to each other from there, and the sound was so much like vowel-shaped light I wanted to live inside it. A quiet thing was asking me to keep it. So I did. You cannot meet noise with noise and expect to keep yourself. If you want quiet back from loud hands, you have to build a structure around it and then shut all the doors. I started by learning the Carvers the way you learn a system that's too proud of itself to hide where the buttons are. I learned their mornings. He left at 7:30 in a truck with Carver and Company. Consulting on the door. A company I could not find on the internet. She returned from a gym around 9 with a smoothie and a stare, and joined her phone call choir by the front window for the rest of the morning. A headset clipped low like a high priest's amulet. Packages arrived for them like weather. They returned things in bursts of black plastic bags. On Thursdays a landscaper came with a crew that trimmed whatever was feeling like it might poke out into the world and make it uglier. On Sundays she baked. When they fought, and they did, in hard piano chords that vibrated through plaster, she would walk outside, call someone named Lisa, and narrate her life the way a bad politician narrates a failure. Knowing a pattern is not the same as touching it. I needed places where my hands could close. Their pride was the easiest. The lawn, the party, the performance. He mowed in lines so straight it looked like he was measuring the sky. She held court on Friday evenings with a wine glass whose stem was her scepter. I made a decision. The thing they used to justify hurting people's appearance would be the thing I would use to take away their furniture one item at a time. It would be quiet. It would be slow. It would be ugly the way mold is ugly. You don't see it until one morning you come downstairs and there it is on the bread, and then you can't remember a time when you didn't know. There are a lot of theatrical stories where someone sneaks into a neighbor's yard and does some simple vandalism and calls it revenge. That's not this. The Carvers breathed complaint into the same air the rest of us used to keep going. They were connected to whoever kept score in a small way that makes small people rich. If you hit them, they would groan and make 10 calls and bleed you with the paperwork of their suffering. I needed collapses that looked accidental. I needed other people's eyes. I needed their house to become a mirror for their noise. I bought a pair of small outdoor speakers and sealed them in plastic and buried them shallow in the mulch bed along our shared property line. I did not play prank sounds or clown laughter. I found a collection of home noises: footsteps upstairs when you were downstairs, a faucet dripping somewhere hidden, a door very gently closing, and I set them on a timer for 4 nights a week, starting at 3:11 a.m. and stopping at 3:19. 8 minutes. Not long enough to be obvious. Long enough to wake a human mind into a quiet panic and then decline to explain itself. The first week I heard their bedroom window open after the second night. The second week a light went on in their hallway at 3:12. The third week Mr. Carver walked their rooms with heavy feet at 4 and stood on the back steps breathing like a man telling himself he can stop a storm with his posture. The bags under their eyes arrived like packages without return addresses. I did not feel triumphant. I felt relieved, like someone else was up with me now in the same bad weather. I did not touch their grass. Touched itself. You don't need to slash a tire if you know where the road floods. In early spring, I planted wildflowers in my backyard along the lowest part of the fence, on my side. I watered them too much. When the rains came, they thickened into a damp seam that never quite dried. When their landscapers mowed, they ran their heavy tires along that seam and carried damp seeds across the line. By July, the sharp green of the Carver's lawn had softened in 3 spots into something less uniform. They attacked it with whatever a person like that orders off a website for control. The spots moved. The lawn started telling the truth about chaos. Mrs. Carver stood out there with a hand on her hip, phone to her ear, and announced to someone that neighbors were inconsiderate. She meant me. I was inside washing dishes, and I laughed exactly once, the dry kind that only your mouth hears. Then I closed the window and kept going. Gossip is a virus that needs a host with a need. I did not invent things about them. Lies are for people who don't believe in gravity to do the heavy lifting. I used the words they said themselves. You know how some people speak as if they're writing their own subpoena? At the first block gathering I bothered to attend, Mr. Carver told a story at the grill about how he got a contractor to eat $5,000 because he had recorded a conversation and leveraged it. He said it the way men say the most cowardly thing they've ever done to test the air. Nobody flinched. One neighbor even complimented him on being a shark. It made me want to go inside, but I stayed and cataloged the names of the people who smiled. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Carver described to someone at the curb how she had managed the principal when her daughter cheated, and the principal felt empowered to suggest consequences. I heard the quotes like footsteps on a stairwell I'd been trying not to notice. I didn't make a fake account to spread rumors. I sent their own words back to the people who had praised them, in screenshots taken from the public posts they loved to make when they were winning. Can you believe this? I wrote, was this your experience too? That's not an accusation. That is a mirror with the lights on. People who had been quiet started replying. People who had smiled because it was easier stopped. Bullies maintain power by structuring every room so that no sounds like an attack. The HOA was their room. They turned sanctimony into a bylaw sandwich and fed it to people who did not have time to read the ingredients. Mr. Carver liked executive sessions because you can't quote an executive session. He liked votes that use words like non-compliance, the way a board doctor likes test results that confirm a prejudice. He was never sloppy in writing, only with breath. So I changed the room. I ran for the compliance committee. Do you know how easy it is to win a seat no one wants? People who work 50 hours a week and parent and try to sleep don't have time to divide their weekends into fines. I do my work with a laptop. I have insomnia, and I am stubborn. I won by default. He wasn't threatened at first because he knew the rules better and had a 4-year head start on friendships made of favor. Our first committee meeting in the back of the clubhouse smelled like coffee that had given up. He tried to run me through with a policy on decorative flags. I asked for the exact language. He recited it perfectly and then looked annoyed when I asked for where it was posted publicly. He shuffled a paper and passed it to me. I put it in the minutes. He called a vote on a woman at the end of the street who had left her garbage can visible for a day after a death in her family. I motioned to table the fine and send a condolence card instead. I lost 3-1, but the quietest person in the room made a noise when she raised her hand against me, and afterward she sent me a text. I hate this. She became my second vote next time. There were a lot of next times. I learned the bylaws like a psalm and recited them softly, politely, until even people who liked him started sighing whenever he started to speak because it meant the meeting wouldn't end on time. You can break a machine by jamming it with the right shape at the right moment. You can also shepherd it to a place where it stops hurting people by its own momentum. I pushed for an amendment requiring transparency, publishing fines, and the logic for them without names. The amendment failed the first time and passed the second, because I brought coffee to the second one and printed copies of the proposed language, and people stopped being afraid of the things they could hold. Once sunlight entered the minutes, the fines started to make people uncomfortable. People do not like to see themselves as mobs. When several of Mr. Carver's favorite motions died in daylight, he grew redder and louder. You cannot file a noise complaint against a meeting. He tried anyway, in the hallway, with me, with anyone, until the president asked him to take a break from leadership to recharge. He heard what he heard. He resigned in a huff and sent an email that said he was stepping back to focus on family. The reactions below that email came from people who had learned politeness as a survival technique. I watched the numbers and knew what they meant. What I have not said yet is the part where they hurt something I loved, because this is the part people will judge me for, and I want them to, because this is where my patience broke like a glass you didn't know was cracked until you poured water into it and it failed in your hand. I had a dog. His name was Pilot. He was 6 years old and made of good bones and a head that slept on my feet while I typed. He was the first creature I'd let depend on me since my parents. He did not bark without a reason, and he loved the sound of the owls the way I did. One afternoon, I let him out in the yard while I took a call. He came back limping. There was a welt on his flank, perfect round, like something in the world had declared ownership. The vet said pellet gun. The vet said he'd keep the pellet his whole life. It was lodged in a way that made digging it out riskier than leaving it. I drove home shaking. I knocked on the Carver's door and asked to speak to Mr. Carver. He denied, of course he denied, of course he asked me if I had proof, of course he asked me maybe I should keep better watch of my animal, of course he said a lot of people had pellet guns because of squirrels, of course he laughed. I went inside and sat on my kitchen floor next to Pilot and put my hand on his shoulder where the fur lifted and lay down again, and I decided something I had been circling for months. I was going to take their lives apart down to the studs. Not physically. Not with violence. Not with anything that would let them make me the villain in a cop's notebook. I would use the systems they worshipped. I would use their own hands when possible. I would never let rage make me sloppy. And I would never say their names out loud when I could avoid it. Names make people feel real. You can't demolish a house gently if you keep naming the rooms. I made a list. At the top I wrote one sentence. They must not belong here anymore. Below it I wrote decades of small steps. I started recording the street from inside my house. Not a camera pointed at their windows. A lens at my own, watching my own yard, my own fence line. It is not illegal to keep a diary of the weather. If someone else walks through your weather, the diary will mention them. The files went into folders with plain names. March, April, May. I watched them when I couldn't sleep. It is amazing, the excuses people give the world for entering other people's time. He walked property lines like they owed him rent. She photographed trivial things and sent them to someone and pressed send with the satisfaction of a child pushing a fire alarm. Their son drove too fast and then drifted the car into a stop at the end of the cul-de-sac like a stunt he was practicing to be seen. I saw him throw a can into my yard one afternoon and recorded him saunter into it later to pick it up and toss it into a different corner, as if the goal was contamination, not littering. I did not show those videos to anyone yet. I let the thicker parts of the file harden. I began to chart their finances. Mrs. Carver loved delivery. It made her happy. The illusion that the world is a catalog and she is always on the glossy page. Boxes piled and left shadows in the porch light. Returns went back. Receipts were in the recycling bin every Tuesday with minimal effort to hide the number subscription after subscription. An expensive lawn service, a hot tub installation invoice with a section redacted that still showed the code of the permit. It was the wrong permit. I did not call the city then. I took photos of the part of the boardwalk behind their property where the hot tub had required digging and pipes had required permission. I waited. They loved mail almost as much as they loved packages. Not my trap catalog trick that would have felt small. I am not proud of what I did, but I am not sorry. I wrote letters from no one in particular and mailed them to my house and put them in an envelope with their address. Then forgot to seal it well enough that the corner would lift when handled and the first line would show if a neighbor picked it up. Past due. Collection notice. I dropped them in front of their porch when I knew the school bus would be nearing. I did not need anyone to open them. I needed the image. You cannot control what a rumor eats once it is loosed. But you can stage the opening scene and let appetite do the rest. On a Saturday in July, the HOA held a street fair. It was not my idea. Everything that tastes like community here started as someone else's way to feel like a person for a day. I volunteered for the table at the entrance. The entrance was a choke point any predator would choose. As people came in, I smiled and handed them a flyer about the new transparency policy. The Carvers came late. Mr. Carver's smile hung on his face like a canvas. Mrs. Carver's was ready to be a knife. They walked past the table without taking a flyer, which would have been fine if she had not looked down at the stack like it had gone to the bathroom wrong. 2 hours later, the raffle began. The president fumbled the microphone. She is a gentle woman who can make a room calm by standing in it, and she hates microphones. When she called the number, it was Mrs. Carver's. She walked forward, queenly, already nodding at people in a way that asked them to be happy for her. The prize was a gift certificate for the same landscaper who had done their yard for years. She said, loudly, "I'll donate it." People clapped. And then a little boy by the popcorn machine said, "They don't need it. Their yard is the worst." It was a child, and it was the truth, and it was an accident, and it was a knife. The sound that moved through the crowd then was a different kind of clap. You can tell when a room is done with someone the way you can tell when a storm is about to break even with the blinds closed. You feel the change in pressure. I printed a poster the size of a TV and put it in my garage, a place where no one goes unless invited. It was a map of the block with pins where each written complaint from the Carvers had originated over the last 3 years, as recorded in the HOA logs I had fought to unseal. Each pin was a small red bead. The board looked like a rash. I didn't show it to people. I left it there for me, to remind me that I was not inventing a monster to justify my behavior. The pins were all the same hand writing letters in the dark. The hot tub broke in late August. Or rather, the pipe beneath it began to leak into the small vanishing strip of trees behind our yards, and what had been a damp path became a little rivulet that ran behind 3 houses and into the gutter at the corner. I took photos for 3 mornings. I did not frame their property in the photos. I framed the water. I emailed the city and attached the images and said, "I believe there is a leak. I am concerned about erosion." The inspector who showed up wore a neon vest and mild eyes and apologized 3 times for being in people's space. He followed the water with a stick like a dowser and took his own photos and thanked me for being proactive. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived for the Carvers. Mr. Carver stood in his driveway and read it and crumpled it halfway and threw it to the ground and then picked it up again because even he understood his life had left the phase where throwing things while someone watches helps. A month after that, a crew came to demolish the deck that had been extended without permission, the square of outdoor space where they had toasted themselves in the holy wine of being above rules. The noise of it was beautiful. Not loud, but thorough. The crew worked like a sentence that had already decided to end and simply moved through each letter until the period. If the story ended there, I could live in it, but revenge doesn't stop where it should, because by the time you reach the point where ending becomes possible, you have become someone who needs an ending that can be felt across the street. The demolition made them hurt. It did not make them stop. The pellet in my dog's side pulsed like a second heart when I looked at them. I told myself I would stop when I could go 7 nights out of 10 without waking at 3:11 to listen for footsteps that weren't there. I didn't meet that mark for months. I took their reputation, which was already listing, and I pushed it sideways. Not with a smear, not with a bomb. With a stream of videos that were exactly as long as attention spans. 5 seconds of Mr. Carver standing over a delivery driver half his size, jabbing a finger where a signature wasn't needed. 12 seconds of him dragging a couple of garbage bags into the little strip of woods and letting them slide down the small hill where the water had been and turning away. 8 seconds of Mrs. Carver blocking the sidewalk with her stroller while a woman with a cane tried to pass and saying, "Go around," with a smile that had teeth in it. I sent the videos to the neighborhood forum from an anonymous account that used only numbers as a name. I wrote only 1 sentence each time. "This happened on our block this week." I did not say who. I did not need to. Everyone knew the wallpaper well enough to recognize the room from a tiny corner. You can argue that this was cruel. It was. You can argue that public shaming is a cudgel that breaks more fingers than it saves. You would be right, and I would still tell you that I watched that woman with the cane turn and take another route, and I could not stand in my kitchen and pretend I could live with everything I was letting continue. After the 3rd video, the president of the HOA sent a community email reminding residents to treat delivery workers with respect, to keep common areas clear, to dispose of waste properly. It read like the 10 Commandments if the 10 Commandments had been written by someone scared of a lawsuit. The replies used phrases like, "We all know who this is about," which is a phrase people use when they want to be brave without being brave. The Carvers started to wave at people more after that, the way a drowning man treads water harder when he understands what water is. Invitations stopped arriving. Their Friday wine club dwindled until only 1 man showed up, and he left early, and afterward I saw him on his phone walking faster than he needed to. Their son crashed into a mailbox backing out and left a note without an apology. I know because the note ended up in the neighborhood forum, and the comments did what the comments do. Everything they had used to hold their heads up in a room became something that made people look down at their plates. I could have stopped there. The deck was gone. The fine was levied. The HOA had seen enough of their inner life to sour the air around them. But every night when I brushed my teeth, Pilot sat by the bathroom door with his one ear slightly cocked and his breathing slow, and I remembered holding him on the kitchen floor and feeling the dull, wrong heat of the pellet under his skin, and the thought of Mr. Carver shaking his head at me that day and saying, "Maybe keep better watch of your animal," lit my hands. I filed a petition to run for HOA president. It sounds like a petty target for a revenge story. It wasn't the title. It was the levers and the routine. The president sees the complaints first. The president sets agendas and chooses who speaks when. The president can make a meeting human or a trap. I campaigned the boring way, door to door with a clipboard and a smile that did not sell anything harder than the promise that I would say out loud what we were doing and let people decide if they liked it with both eyes open. I listened to pensions and babysitting schedules and how the park needed a light repaired. I asked people what rule they would remove if they could. I filled a notebook with answers like, the one where they can find me for putting a wreath up on my door that isn't a holiday yet, and the one where my fence has to be exactly the same color as everyone's fence, and the one where my life is small enough that a stranger thinks he can rearrange my house with a paragraph. I won because no one campaigns that way for a job that pays nothing and takes your evenings. I won, and Mr. Carver stood at the back of the clubhouse that night with his arms crossed and his face the color of old tile, and he did not clap. From the chair, I did not move their lives with a sword. I signed a dozen emails that started with "in good faith" and ended with "thank you for your patience." We held a meeting on a Saturday morning where we voted to change the enforcement policy to give warnings first, second, third. We voted to make fines appealable by email instead of in person, because you shouldn't have to perform your grief on a Tuesday night to avoid paying $100 for leaving a trash can out after your mother died. We created a channel where people could post questions anonymously about rules without triggering enforcement. We published the financials, which nobody read, which is not the point. The point is that people can read them if one day they wake up with the right kind of anger and a free hour. The Carvers filed 3 appeals in 6 months. 2 they won because the new policy meant the old one was a bad fit for the shape of the human day. 1 they lost because a recording of their daughter leaving grocery carts across handicapped spaces at the store is not a thing that should be happening in a civilization. The tone of their emails changed from "we expect" to "we are disappointed," which is the way people talk when they feel their influence thinning like hair. They stopped attending meetings. They stopped standing at the edge of conversations and waiting for someone to ask, "What do you think, Don?" He is not Don. He is something like it. They stopped looking at me like a problem they could solve. They began looking past me like a weather system coming in off the trees that they might not have prepared for. I wish I could tell you I didn't enjoy any of it. I did, sometimes, in sharp and ugly mouthfuls that tasted like relief and tasted like something you shouldn't swallow too fast if you don't want to damage yourself. I started sleeping through the night again. The speakers in the mulch had gone quiet months before because I didn't need a clock at 3:11 anymore to tell me I was still mad. The owls returned and called to each other across the strip of trees at the back fence. And sometimes I whistled the echo like a bad duet, and Pilot wagged his tail against the kitchen cabinets and made a sound like a sneeze. The last move was not mine, which is the right way for a story like this to end. I did not put the "for sale" sign in their yard. I did not place the box taped tight in the middle of their living room floor next to the wet ring where the hot tub had used to steam. I did not wait in the driveway while they loaded furniture in the artificial quiet that comes when a house stops pretending it is a person. The sign arrived in early spring, when the lawn hadn't decided yet if it would try for uniformity or accept the truth that some seeds you don't intend will bloom if the ground is disturbed enough times. The listing went up, which I know because my job has made me good at finding things on screens, and the photos tried very hard to be generous. On the day they left, I was on my porch at an angle that didn't require my face. Mrs. Carver walked down the path in sunglasses that reflected the world back to itself, and she held her shoulders the way someone holds them when they believe the world is full of cameras. Mr. Carver carried a box with the arms of a man who once did not have to carry his own boxes. Their son leaned against the car and looked at his phone and laughed at something that had nothing to do with the life his family had made, as if laughter would convince the life to keep up with him. The movers were efficient without being cruel. There is an art to being a witness without being a spectator. I watched the way you watch weather at a distance and hope it moves along. He glanced up once and saw me. Our eyes did not linger. I saw a dozen arguments in his jaw and did not accept any of them. There was no conversation left to have. I went inside and made coffee and stood at the sink and listened to the sound of a truck pulling away, and the quiet that followed was a thing I could keep. People asked later, softly, to the side, "Do you think it's better now? Do you think you went too far?" Better is for children and dogs. What I have is peace that sits, that doesn't flare or ask for applause. Did I go too far? I will be answering that question for the rest of my life. I will be answering it when I walk past the small white scar in Pilot's fur and touch it with the back of my fingers the way you touch a hot pan to make sure you're remembering correctly. I will be answering it when I see the woman with the cane walking down the sidewalk without stopping. When the delivery driver leaves a package at my neighbor's door and does not flinch. When the trash cans stand like patient animals at the curb and nobody feels the need to photograph their posture. I will be answering it when I sit on my porch and listen to the owls and follow the shape of their call out past the dark line of trees and across the roofs of houses that are not arguing about whether a person with a wreath should be fined for being a day ahead of a holiday. After they left, I took the poster down in my garage with the pins. I put it in the recycling because I did not want it in my house as a trophy. I kept one pin. I don't know why. It sits in the drawer by the sink with rubber bands and a screwdriver that fits nothing I own. Sometimes I open the drawer because I need a pen and I see it, and for a second I don't remember what it is, and then I do. It looks like a drop of dried blood from far away. Up close it looks like a bead you put on a string when you're making a necklace and you want a color that isn't quite red. I stayed in the house. I planted a row of blueberry bushes along the back fence and put burlap on them in winter, and forgot to take the burlap down one spring until July because the world was soft that year and nothing came on time. Pilot learned that the sound of the kitchen chair moving meant I was going to stand and he would get to stand too. I joined a group that reads long, boring novels once a month and argues kindly about the parts that feel like the author is talking to himself. I went to the Park 3 neighborhoods over where people whose lives have not been dominated by someone else's need for control make circles with their kids and talk about things that are small enough to hold without breaking. Every now and then a new family moves into the Carver's old place. They stand on the sidewalk in front of the for sale sign with a realtor who gestured once at my porch and smiled at me like we are all in on something clean. On those days, I remember the first afternoon I stood here with my hands open and promised myself quiet. I keep the promise now the way you keep any promise worth making. You keep it on purpose every day, even when no one is watching. If the people who moved and asked about the history, I would tell them the truth in a version they could live with. I would say the block used to be louder. I would say it is better now. I would not say why. This is not a confession because I am not sorry. This is not a warning because I do not believe the world learns from other people's bruises. This is a record. I have found that records matter. When you put something on a line of words and give it a date, it loses the power it had when it lived only inside your bones. It becomes something that can be set down and picked up again without some of you sticking to it every time. I am setting this down now. I will wake tomorrow and mow my lawn and wave at the woman who lost her husband last year and stopped bringing in her trash can on time for a while and nobody find her because we are not that kind of neighborhood anymore. I will fill Pilot's bowl and he will look up with that gratitude dogs have that makes you feel like your hands are useful. I will sit at my desk and push code around like furniture until it fits. I will hear the owls at night. If I wake at 3:11, I will let the minute pass and not listen for footsteps. The house knows my name now and I know it's. The quiet is not a visitor. It is a resident. If you were expecting a lesson, there is only this. Some people mistake rules for goodness. Some people weaponize order because chaos terrifies them, and they inflict that terror on whatever they can reach. You cannot argue with a terror that has learned to speak in fines and bylaws and complaints sent at 6:01 a.m. You can, however, widen the room until their voice thins. You can build procedures that require them to present their fear in daylight and let the ordinary mercy of other people decide whether it gets to run things. And if that fails, you can put stones in the path where you know their steps will land, because they believe the path is theirs and cannot imagine they are capable of stumbling. I placed a lot of stones. I watched them trip. I did not offer my hand. I won't pretend I did not enjoy some of the falls. I also won't pretend I did not sit afterward and breathe like someone who has climbed something very high and is not sure whether he should look down. It has been months since they left. The last rumor I heard about them came from the man who runs the hardware store and knows everything before it happens. They moved 2 towns over, closer to her sister, into a place with a smaller yard. Less to manage, he said, as if neatness were a tax. People change, he said. And then he looked at me for a second like he wanted to apologize for telling me the news, as if he knew my part in it without knowing it. They'll be fine, he said. I nodded. I hope so. Fine is a low bar everyone deserves to clear. I don't want them ruined. I wanted them gone. Those are different prayers. When the wind is right, I can still smell the cedar. It has a way of making yesterday small. I sit on the porch in the evening sometimes and think about how revenge is an architecture that reveals whether you are building a prison or a house. I tried to build a house where quiet could live. I used their bricks because I had them in a pile on my lawn and I was tired of tripping over them. I arranged those bricks into a doorway wide enough for other people to walk through without bumping their shoulders. Some days the doorway looks like a guillotine when I remember the pellet under my dog's skin. Some days it looks like a church door. Most days it looks like the front of my home. I should say one last thing because someone will ask it if I don't. Yes, if they had apologized if he had knocked on my door and said the word sorry without a price tag attached. If she had stopped measuring other people's lives and measured her own instead, I would have moved the pins on that poster and called it almost even. They never did. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe the muscle they used to apologize atrophied the year they learned that a threat works faster. I don't know. I do know that silence is not forgiveness and distance is not peace. Peace is work. Quiet is a structure. I maintain it now with my hands and my choices and the knowledge that if another version of them moves in one day, I have the tools to keep my life from shrinking in their direction again. That is the end. I am not proud the way a man is proud of a trophy. I am proud the way a man is proud of a scar that closed. I run my thumb over it sometimes, in the drawer where the pin sits, on the fur where the pellet sleeps, in the space at the back door where the speakers used to hum. I do not pretend that what I did is a model. I do not pretend that I am a hero. I was a man with a house and a dog and neighbors who were noise, and I made a plan until they were gone. The owls call. The night answers. That is enough.